All right, great. Well, objects of importance is what you want to think about. What objects are you going to make? For that first assignment, thinking about coil building and pinch slabs. And if you further look at some other demonstrations down the quarter, some of those techniques may help you too. The importance of everyday objects. The main fact is that as artists and designers, um, we are the object makers. And also, I would have to say the idea makers too. Some of the oldest objects, like this bone flute from 43,000 years ago, um, obviously for making beautiful sounds. Uh, this is an old piece thinking about maybe fertility, we speculate. Um, this mammoth sculpture from 33,000 BCE is probably because that was a source of food. Um, Ideas of beauty also come into objects that we make for utility. Utility is not always about beauty, but you can see with these hair combs from Japan, they reference both utility and beauty. And I find tools and utility to be amazing. We make these beautiful things that are a necessity. We need to use these tools. These are some from the Guinness Brewery in Ireland. These are to make barrels. This is an example of an object that humans created. It's a carburetor, and this from a 1951 Ford. I think it's a really nice object. Everybody generally wears shoes nowadays. Look at some of the oldest shoes; they're pretty cool in their antiquity. This is one of my favorite contemporary shoe designers, John Fluvog. He was the designer for Doc Martens. I find him to be one of the top designers. I really like how funky his designs are. This is one of my favorite men pairs. And then, of course, sticking along with shoes, you can find humor. You can find grossness or humor. Sometimes it fits in together. So here's some examples of students of mine who've worked on shoes. Sometimes I make that first assignment based around something that everybody has on their feet at the time. So that's a good model. Uh, some fire examples. One of my favorite artists is Marilyn Levine, by far one of the top artists working in trompe l'oeil, fooling the eye. So these are clay. These shoes are clay. And the metallic areas, like these areas where the laces go through, the eyelets, those are actually clay too, using the luster glaze. My son didn't believe it, because there was glass in front of this clay bag that she made. He's like, no, that's leather, that's leather. So when you see him in person, you're just blown away at Marilyn Levine's skills. Some of my favorite pieces of Marilyn Levine's are handbags and leather jackets. You look at the details, how old that leather is, or how the folds in these jackets are. Another trompe l'oeil artist who was just an amazing artist and great woman named Sylvia Hyman. She was an artist working in Nashville, Tennessee when I taught at Belmont University. I actually had a student who came in as her assistant, and he would come up into class and demo some of her techniques. I'd be like, whoa, that's cool. Quite often you see letters that were really important to her, music scores, violin cases. Sylvia Hyman's work was just amazing. A contemporary artist who works to this day, who I find really fascinating, is Richard Shaw. Here's some of Richard's work. Now, of course, as you advance, you can think about ceramic decals and other techniques, and I can talk to you about how these pieces are made further. Here's a piece that can be thought of as objects at maybe a specific morning. Possibly a letter he's yet to open before he has his coffee. The artist, he chooses like a book called Dead Air. Why did he choose that book? Skillfully manipulating the material, Richard Shaw worked both with figurative directions. These are larger scale pieces, and then these still lifes. The work of Ted Vogel uses objects of sentimentality and utility. The object is sometimes made of glass or bronze along with ceramic material. Marian Helberg work kind of takes objects and kind of flattens them, almost like drawings in porcelain. Isma Noguchi work with slabs a lot. This is kind of a table-looking thing. So it's like when you're choosing an object for this assignment, like what's important to you? This camera, for instance, was my father's. It's a Leica M3, and all the lenses I have for it, it's just beautifully made, and just they mean a lot to me. Maybe it's sentimental. But what is a camera? How do you look at it? Do you break it up so you make it realistic, or do you think about how you can abstract it? Maybe a Stradivarius or other violins. Of course, they had their main thing, just like that bone flute, was to produce these sounds. Here's a piece I did that was based off of violins. And I like tools, so I'll show you a little bit of my work. Like this is kind of just demos I've done. So when we talk about scale, obviously we're limited to scale, especially as this assignment, your introductory assignment. You don't want to push scale too much, but it's when you bring things out of scale in a larger scale or down to a smaller scale, it changes the dynamic. These pieces of Klaus Oldenburg's actually in a monolithic state make you look at this in a variety of ways. Like this shuttlecock is probably 14 feet high. But when we look at things like that are small, maybe under the electron microscope, this is something that's been multiplied 800 times. And even though you really can't stand what this is, when you look at the detail, you can be encapsulated at its beauty. This is actually a mosquito foot. Patty Chalmers is a cool artist she did all these pieces like one object a day for a while. I just throw through some of that series that she did. I'm going to only go through a few months worth or a month worth. And you see how like the knife is way out of scale, right? As is that little screwdriver or the key. So we can look at first professional work that I've shown you, like with trompe l'oeil work. You can also look at funk art or a lot of different ways to make these objects that you want to make. You don't have to be super realistic, or you can get really funky with it. So the most notable artist out of this funk art movement was Robert Artisan, and he had a lot of humor in his work. This is one of his last pieces, if not his last piece. So he really liked Jackson Pollock, and so he did a portrait and did this Jackson Pollock kind of sarcophagi. So what are you going to make? That's the question. This is your job now. Do some good drawings, and we'll pass those drawings back and forth, and I'll try and give some feedback on how to make the work you want to make. All right, dive on in.